I ruined my sex life by being honest, and now I'm the one suffering for it while everyone tells me I got what I deserved. My friends think I'm ridiculous for begging my own husband for physical attention after I wounded his ego. My sister says I made my bed and now I have to lie in it, alone. They don't understand that I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was trying to save our marriage before it became another statistic, before we became roommates who occasionally kissed goodnight. But here's what I haven't told anyone: what I actually said to Mark that night was so much worse than just, "You're bad in bed." And the real reason he won't touch me now? That's not about his ego at all. I should start by explaining that Mark and I had always been solid. We met at 23 through mutual friends at a camping trip where everyone got drunk on cheap beer, and I fell into the lake trying to take an artsy photo of the sunset. Mark pulled me out, wrapped me in his jacket, and sat with me by the fire until I stopped shivering. We dated for 3 years, got engaged on the anniversary of that camping trip, married 6 months later at a small ceremony in his parents' backyard. For the first 2 years of marriage, everything felt easy. We were both working demanding jobs, me in marketing, him in IT, but we made time for each other. Weekend brunches, evening walks, the occasional spontaneous road trip. Our physical relationship was good. Not earth-shattering, but satisfying, comfortable. I never thought to complain because I loved him and assumed this was what mature adult intimacy looked like. Then Sarah moved in next door. Sarah, with her spinning stories about her boyfriend's romantic gestures, their adventurous weekends, their apparently mind-blowing physical connection. I'd hear these stories over coffee on Saturday mornings, and something started gnawing at me. A whisper that maybe I was settling. Maybe there was more out there that I was missing. I started noticing things about Mark that had never bothered me before. The way he'd sometimes just roll over and fall asleep after. How our routine had become exactly that, routine. Same positions, same location, same time of week, predictable as a television schedule. I bought a book about spicing up your marriage. Mark found it on my nightstand and laughed, thinking it was sweet. We tried one suggestion, candles and music, but it felt forced and we both ended up giggling and going back to our normal routine. I told myself it was fine. This was real life, not a romance novel. Then I made the mistake of reading online forums. Hundreds of women describing experiences I'd never had, talking about desire and passion like they were everyday occurrences. I started wondering if something was wrong with me, or worse, if something was wrong with Mark. The thought took root and I couldn't shake it. I began analyzing every intimate moment we had, comparing it to what I'd read online, to what Sarah described over coffee. I was building a case against my own marriage without even realizing it. I suggested trying new things, tentatively at first. Mark seemed willing but confused about where this was coming from. I couldn't tell him the truth, that I'd been consuming stories about other people's sex lives and finding ours lacking in comparison. So I framed it as wanting to keep things fresh and reconnect. He went along with it, but I could tell his heart wasn't fully in it. He was doing it because I asked, not because he wanted to. That should have been my first clue that the problem wasn't actually about sex. But I kept pushing. I bought lingerie that sat in my drawer because I felt ridiculous putting it on. I suggested watching videos together, which made us both uncomfortable and ended with us watching a nature documentary instead. I dropped hints about fantasies that I didn't actually have because I thought I should want more adventurous things. Our actual intimate moments became less frequent because I'd built them up in my mind as performances that needed to be evaluated. Mark started seeming hesitant, like he was worried about disappointing me. Which of course he was, because I couldn't hide my growing frustration. My friend Jessica asked me one Thursday during lunch why I seemed distracted. I confided that I was worried Mark and I weren't compatible in bed anymore. She asked what had changed. I couldn't give her a real answer because nothing had actually changed except my perception. She suggested couples counseling, but I dismissed it. I didn't think we needed therapy for something I could just communicate directly. That was my second mistake. I thought honest communication meant blunt criticism. The night it happened, we'd attempted intimacy and it was fine, perfectly fine, but fine felt like failure to me now. Mark could tell I was distracted and he asked what was wrong. I should have said nothing or I'm just tired. Instead, I told him we needed to talk about our sex life. He sat up, already looking worried. I can still see his face in the lamplight, the way his expression shifted from concern to confusion to hurt as I spoke. I told him I wasn't satisfied, that our physical relationship had become boring and predictable, that I needed more effort, more enthusiasm, more everything. Mark asked what specifically he could do differently. This was the moment I should have realized he was trying, that he cared, that communication could be constructive. Instead, I said the thing I can't take back. I told him that frankly, he wasn't good in bed, and I was starting to understand why his previous relationship had ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's ex-girlfriend had left him for someone else, and it had devastated him. He confided in me early in our relationship that she'd made comments about him being boring and passionless. I'd spent hours reassuring him that he was neither of those things, that she was wrong, that I loved exactly who he was. And now I'd confirmed his deepest insecurity. I'd become the voice of his ex-girlfriend, validating every cruel thing she'd said. Mark got out of bed without a word. He grabbed his pillow and a blanket and left the room. I heard the guest bedroom door close. I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding, realizing what I'd done but still feeling justified. I'd been honest, right? Communication was supposed to be important in marriage. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I'd convinced myself that Mark would cool down and we'd have a productive conversation. We'd work through this together. Maybe he'd even thank me for being honest about my needs. He left for work early without saying goodbye. When I texted him an apology, he responded with, "It's fine. You were honest. I appreciate that." But it wasn't fine, and I was about to learn exactly how not fine it was. The next few days were awkward. We were polite to each other, cordial even, but there was a distance that hadn't existed before. Mark didn't try to touch me at all, no goodnight kiss, no morning hug, no casual hand on my shoulder while passing in the kitchen. I told myself he was still processing, that he needed space. A week passed, then two. Mark continued being kind and considerate in every other way. He did the dishes without being asked, brought home my favorite takeout, asked about my day. But physically, nothing. He maintained a careful distance, never letting our bodies touch, even accidentally. I started to panic. I thought I wanted more passion, but what I was getting was no passion at all, no intimacy of any kind. I tried to initiate a kiss one evening and Mark turned his head so I caught his cheek instead. He said he was tired and went to bed early. In the guest room, where he now slept every night, I asked him directly when things were going to go back to normal. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read and said, "I'm working on being better. I don't want to disappoint you again." The way he said it made my stomach drop. There was no anger in his voice, no bitterness, just resignation. Like he'd accepted a fundamental truth about himself and was trying to do damage control. I tried to explain that I hadn't meant it the way it came out, that I was frustrated and said something hurtful in the moment. Mark nodded and said he understood, but nothing changed. He still didn't touch me, still slept in the other room, still treated me like a roommate he was friendly with but not attracted to. Sarah noticed I seemed down and asked about it over coffee. I gave her a vague explanation about Mark and I having some issues. She immediately jumped to conclusions, asking if he was having an affair or if we were separating. I assured her it was nothing that dramatic, just some communication problems. She suggested I plan a romantic evening to reconnect. I tried. I made his favorite dinner, put on a dress he'd always liked, lit candles. Mark came home, saw the setup, and his face did something complicated. He thanked me for the effort, ate dinner, making pleasant conversation, then excused himself to take a shower. When he emerged, he went straight to the guest room. I followed him, demanding to know when he was going to forgive me. He turned to look at me with tired eyes and said, "I'm not mad at you. I'm just trying to respect what you told me. You said I wasn't good enough, so I'm not going to subject you to that anymore." I argued that I wanted him, that I missed him, that I was sorry for what I'd said. He smiled sadly and told me that wanting someone and being satisfied by them were two different things. He said he'd rather we maintain a good partnership than risk disappointing me again and destroying what we still had. I stood there in the hallway of our house, begging my husband to sleep with me, while he gently but firmly refused for my own supposed benefit. It was the most absurd and devastating thing I'd experienced in our entire marriage. My sister visited that weekend and immediately sensed the tension. She pulled me aside and asked what was going on. I broke down and told her everything, what I'd said, how Mark had reacted, the weeks of distance and rejection. I expected sympathy. Instead, she asked why I'd said something so cruel in the first place. I tried to explain about the forums and Sarah's stories and feeling like I was missing out. My sister looked at me like I'd grown a second head. She asked if I'd been unhappy before I started consuming all that content. I admitted I hadn't. She asked if Mark had been a good partner before that night. I said yes. She told me I'd manufactured a problem out of insecurity and comparison, then burned down my marriage to solve a problem that didn't exist. Her words stung because they were true, but I still wasn't ready to accept full responsibility. I argued that Mark was overreacting, that shutting me out wasn't productive, that we should be working through this together. My sister pointed out that Mark wasn't shutting me out, he was protecting himself from someone who'd confirmed his worst fears about himself. "You basically told him his ex was right about him," she said. "Why would he ever want to be vulnerable with you again?" I called Jessica for a different perspective, hoping she'd be more sympathetic. She was, but she also asked the hard questions. Had Mark ever actually been bad in bed, or had I just decided he was because other people claimed to have better? When I couldn't answer, she sighed and said I needed to figure out what I actually wanted versus what I thought I should want. But here's what I haven't told my sister or Jessica or anyone that night when I said those horrible things to Mark. It wasn't just about sex. I'd also told him that I'd been faking enthusiasm for months, that I'd been pretending to be satisfied when I wasn't, that every time we'd been intimate recently, I'd been mentally checking out and wishing for something different. I'd stripped away every good memory, rewritten our entire physical history as a lie I'd been telling. I'd taken moments that had been genuinely good and real for both of us and retroactively poisoned them. Mark hadn't just lost confidence in his current abilities, he'd lost the ability to trust any positive experience we'd ever shared. And I'd done it because I was too cowardly to admit that my dissatisfaction wasn't about him at all. It was about me consuming other people's highlight reels and deciding my perfectly good life wasn't good enough. It was about external validation and insecurity and a complete inability to appreciate what I had. The rejection continued. I tried everything, directly asking for intimacy, trying to seduce him, having serious conversations about working through this together. Mark remained kind and distant. He started going to the gym more, reading books about relationships, even watching some videos online about improving performance. He was taking my criticism seriously and trying to fix himself, which somehow made everything worse. I didn't want him to change. I wanted him back the way he was. I wanted to undo what I'd said and the way I'd said it. But time doesn't work that way. 3 months in, Mark suggested couples counseling. I jumped at the chance, thinking a therapist would help us reconnect. Our first session, the counselor asked each of us to describe the problem from our perspective. Mark calmly explained that he was working on addressing the issues I'd raised about our physical relationship, but that he needed time to build his confidence back up because he was afraid of disappointing me again. The therapist turned to me. I tried to explain that I'd made a mistake, that I wanted to take back what I'd said, that I missed my husband. The therapist asked what specifically I'd said that night. I couldn't bring myself to repeat it in front of Mark. The words were too cruel. Mark said them for me. He recited what I'd said about him not being good in bed, about his ex being right, about me faking it for months. Hearing it in his voice, said without emotion like he was reading a grocery list, made me realize how deeply I'd damaged him. He'd memorized my criticism word for word because it had confirmed every insecurity he'd ever had about himself. The therapist asked me why I'd said those things. I gave my explanation about the online forums and comparison and feeling dissatisfied. The therapist then asked if Mark had actually changed his behavior in any way, or if only my perception had changed. I admitted it was the latter. So you created a narrative that your partner was inadequate based on external comparisons rather than your actual experience with him, the therapist summarized. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. The therapist looked at Mark and asked how that made him feel. Mark was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, like, I don't know what's real anymore. If she was lying then, how do I know she's not lying now? When she says she wants me, is that true, or will she tell me in 6 months that she was faking this too? I had no answer for that. The therapist gave us homework, exercises to rebuild trust and communication. But I could see in Mark's eyes that he was going through the motions to save the marriage, not because he believed it would actually work. That night I tried to talk to him about the session. Mark was packing for a work trip, 3 days in another city for a conference. He assured me the trip had been planned for months, but the timing felt deliberate. He needed space from me from the constant pressure to forgive and forget something that had fundamentally changed how he saw himself and our relationship. While he was gone, I spiraled. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus on work, couldn't stop replaying that night and every moment since. Sarah came over with wine and asked why I looked so wrecked. I told her everything, the real version with all the ugly details I'd been hiding. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, I think I owe you an apology. I've been going on and on about my relationship like it's some fairy tale, but I haven't been honest with you. Jake and I fight constantly. The adventures I talk about, we take them because we can't stand being home alone together. The passion. It's mostly make-up sex after terrible arguments. I've been making it sound better than it is because I was embarrassed that my perfect relationship wasn't actually perfect. I stared at her. So I destroyed my marriage over stories that weren't even true, she winced. I mean, your marriage isn't destroyed yet. But yeah, you basically compared your real life to everyone else's curated version of theirs and found yourself lacking. That's social media brain, except you did it to your own husband's face. I wanted to be angry at her for lying, but I couldn't. I'd sought out the comparison. I'd consumed the content. I'd made the choice to devalue what I had based on what other people claimed to have. Sarah had just been doing what everyone does, presenting the best version of her life to the world. When Mark came back from his trip, he seemed lighter somehow, more at peace. We had dinner together and he talked about the conference, about meeting up with an old college friend who lived in the city, about potentially taking on a new project at work. He seemed happy, just not happy with me. I asked him directly if he was thinking about leaving. Mark looked genuinely surprised by the question. No, he said. I meant my vows. I'm committed to this marriage. I just need to figure out how to be better so we can have what you want. I don't want you to be better. I shouted, startling both of us. I want you to be you. I want us to go back to how we were. Mark shook his head. We can't go back. You told me the truth about how you felt. I can't unknow that. I can't just pretend you were satisfied when you told me explicitly that you weren't. The only way forward is for me to actually address the issues you raised. But the issues weren't real. I made them up in my head. He looked at me with something close to pity. That doesn't matter. Real or not, that's how you felt. Those were your genuine feelings at the time. And if you felt that way once, you could feel that way again. I need to make sure I'm actually meeting your needs so you don't have to fake it anymore. I realized then that Mark believed he was being a good husband by respecting my criticism. He thought he was doing the right thing by taking my complaints seriously and trying to improve. He'd internalized my cruelty as truth, and now he was building his entire self-image around it. The thing I haven't told anyone, not my sister, not Jessica, not even our therapist, is what happened 2 nights before that confrontation. Mark and I had been intimate, and it had been genuinely good. Connected and sweet, and exactly what I needed. Afterward, while he was in the bathroom, I'd scrolled through my phone and seen one of those posts about signs your relationship lacks passion. I'd read through the list, mentally checking boxes that didn't apply to us just so they would fit. When Mark came back to bed, he tried to cuddle with me, and I pulled away because I was too busy manufacturing dissatisfaction to accept genuine affection. He'd asked if I was okay, and I'd said I was fine, just tired. He'd kissed my shoulder and fallen asleep while I lay there building a case against him for crimes he hadn't committed. The next day, I'd gone to lunch with Sarah and listened to her stories with envy instead of skepticism. I'd come home and looked at Mark, kind, stable, devoted Mark, and seen inadequacy instead of security. I'd spent an entire day rewriting our relationship history to justify feelings I'd created out of nothing. And then the night after that, I'd taken all that manufactured discontent and weaponized it against him. I'd chosen the most hurtful words I could find, targeted his deepest insecurity, and convinced myself I was being honest, when really I was just being cruel. 4 months after that night, we went to a wedding. Mark's college friend, the one he'd seen during his business trip. I watched Mark throughout the reception, dancing with his friend's grandmother, making the flower girl laugh, giving a heartfelt toast. He was charming and warm and exactly himself. Several women flirted with him openly, and he was politely friendly in return. I realized other people saw what I'd stopped seeing, that Mark was actually a catch. That I'd been lucky to find someone so genuinely good. That the problem had never been him, it had always been me and my inability to appreciate what I had while I had it. On the drive home, I told him I wanted to stop therapy. Mark looked over at me, concerned. I explained that I didn't think therapy was helping because the problem wasn't our relationship. It was my insecurity and comparison and inability to be content. I told him I was going to find my own therapist to work on those issues. He reached over and squeezed my hand. It was the first time he'd voluntarily touched me in months. I think that's really brave, he said. I'm proud of you for recognizing that. I started seeing a therapist the next week. She asked me to describe my relationship with Mark before the incident, as we called it. I painted a picture of stability and comfort and genuine partnership. She asked what had changed. I told her about the forums and Sarah and the comparison spiral. She nodded and said, "So you experienced contentment, but you didn't recognize it as valuable because it wasn't dramatic or Instagram-worthy." That's exactly what I'd done. I had real happiness, but because it was quiet and steady and not worth posting about, I decided it wasn't enough. I wanted the high of new relationship energy and passionate drama, because that's what everyone else seemed to have. I'd wanted validation from strangers on the internet more than I'd valued the actual person sleeping next to me every night. My therapist gave me homework: write down every good thing about Mark and our relationship. Every moment of genuine connection, every kindness, every reason I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. I filled pages. The time he'd driven 3 hours to help my mom move furniture. The way he always remembered to buy my favorite coffee creamer. How he'd held me through food poisoning without complaint. The camping trips and quiet mornings and inside jokes and 1,000 tiny moments that made up a real, actual, good relationship. I showed the list to Mark one evening. Read through it, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "I've been so focused on what I did wrong that I forgot we had good things too," he said. We cried together for the first time since this whole nightmare started. But we still didn't touch beyond that. Mark was still scared, and I couldn't blame him. The breakthrough came 6 months after that terrible night. We were watching a movie on the couch, sitting on opposite ends like strangers in a waiting room. A scene came on where a couple was arguing and the woman said something intentionally cruel to hurt the man. Mark grabbed the remote and paused it. "Is that what I looked like?" he asked quietly. "When you said those things?" I looked at the actor's face, frozen in an expression of devastation. "Worse," I admitted. "So much worse. And I knew it was hurting you while I was saying it. And I did it anyway because I wanted you to hurt like I was hurting, except I wasn't actually hurting. I just convinced myself I was supposed to be." Mark was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. I'm scared that if I touch you again, you'll be disappointed and I won't survive hearing that a second time. I finally understood. This wasn't about ego or stubbornness or punishing me. Mark was genuinely terrified of being vulnerable with someone who'd already shown they could use that vulnerability to destroy him. I can't promise I'll never disappoint you, I said. But I can promise that I'll never deliberately hurt you like that again. And I can promise that I'm done comparing you to imaginary standards. I want you exactly as you are, or I don't want anyone at all. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in months. I miss you, he said. I miss my wife. I'm right here, I told him. I've been right here the whole time. That night Mark slept in our bed again. We didn't do anything but hold each other, and it was the most intimate we'd been since everything fell apart. His arms around me felt like coming home after being lost for months. Recovery has been slow. We're rebuilding trust piece by piece, moment by moment. Mark still has bad days where I can see the insecurity creeping back in. I still have moments of anxiety where I wonder if I've permanently damaged something that can't be fully repaired. But we're trying. I deleted all the relationship forums from my bookmarks. I stopped following accounts that made me feel inadequate about my own life. I started being honest with Sarah about my actual feelings instead of just listening to her curated stories. I invested in my own therapy and in understanding why I needed external validation so badly that I destroyed internal peace. Mark started therapy too, working through the damage from his ex and from me, 2 women who told him he wasn't enough. We went to couples counseling and actually did the work instead of just going through the motions. We learned to communicate without cruelty, to express needs without comparison, to value what we had instead of mourning what we didn't. But here's the worst part, the thing that keeps me up at night: we lost 6 months of our marriage because I couldn't appreciate what I had while I had it. 6 months where we could have been happy, but instead we were both miserable because I'd chosen to burn everything down rather than examine my own insecurity. I think about the woman I was before that night, content with my life, happy with my husband, secure in my relationship. I miss her. She was smarter than I gave her credit for. She understood that happiness doesn't always look like passion and drama, that steady and reliable can be more valuable than exciting and unpredictable, that the grass isn't greener on the other side, it's greener where you water it. The other day I overheard Mark on the phone with his friend from the wedding. His friend was complaining about his own relationship struggles, and Mark said, "Marriage is work, man. You have to choose each other every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." I stood in the hallway listening to my husband defend the institution of marriage despite everything I'd put him through, and I felt simultaneously grateful and ashamed. Grateful that he was still choosing me. Ashamed that I'd given him so many reasons not to. We're intimate again now, and it's better than it ever was before, not because Mark changed anything about his technique, but because we're both fully present and vulnerable and honest. Turns out the problem was never about performance. It was about connection, trust, and my inability to recognize that what we had was actually rare and valuable. I'm telling this story now because last night, I saw a post in one of those relationship forums I used to frequent. A woman was complaining that her boyfriend wasn't meeting her needs, that she'd read about what other couples do and felt like she was missing out. The comments were all encouraging her to communicate her needs and not settle for less than she deserves. I wanted to comment and tell her my story. Tell her that manufactured dissatisfaction can destroy something real. That comparing your relationship to carefully curated stories from strangers is a recipe for misery. That sometimes the problem isn't your partner, it's you and your inability to appreciate what you have. But I didn't comment, because I know she wouldn't listen, just like I wouldn't have listened if someone had told me. Sometimes people need to burn their own lives down to learn the lesson. I just hope she figures it out before she says something she can't take back to someone who doesn't deserve to hear it. I hope she recognizes contentment before she trades it for regret. I hope she's smarter than I was. Mark walked in while I was staring at that post, and he asked what I was thinking about. I told him the truth, that I was thinking about how stupid I'd been, how lucky I am that he gave me another chance, how grateful I am for every boring, predictable, perfectly comfortable moment we share. He kissed my forehead and said, "We're both works in progress, that's what makes us work. And maybe that's the real lesson here: perfection isn't the goal. Growth is. Forgiveness is. Choosing each other even when you've given each other every reason to walk away." I destroyed my husband's confidence and nearly destroyed my marriage because I wanted something I didn't even actually want. I told him he was bad in bed when the real problem was that I was bad at gratitude. I pushed him away and then begged for him back, learning the hard way that words can wound deeper than any physical injury. So yes, I told him he was bad in bed, and yes, now I'm begging for attention I already had before I threw it away. And yes, I deserve every bit of judgment that comes with that, but I'm also fighting every day to deserve the second chance I've been given, to be the partner Mark deserves, To recognize contentment when I have it instead of manufacturing problems that don't exist. The question I keep asking myself is, was I right to be honest about my feelings, even if those feelings were manufactured? Or should I have examined those feelings more carefully before weaponizing them? I still don't know the answer. All I know is that honesty without kindness is cruelty, and that sometimes the truth we think we need to speak is just our own insecurity wearing a disguise. I'm not asking for sympathy. I know what I did, and I know I earned every lonely night and rejected advance. I'm just hoping that maybe someone reading this will think twice before they tell their partner something cruel in the name of honesty. Before they compare their real life to someone else's highlight reel. Before they trade contentment for chaos because they don't recognize how valuable quiet happiness actually is. Mark is sleeping peacefully next to me right now, his hand resting on my arm, trusting me again despite everything. I don't deserve him, but I'm going to spend the rest of our marriage trying to prove I can be worthy of that trust. That's my confession. That's my cautionary tale. Judge me however you want. I've already judged myself more harshly than you ever could.